Good evening. My name is Jeff Perry. I am Superintendent of Schools here in Hamlin County. We certainly appreciate you joining us this evening for this virtual community forum. It is our hope that we can use this particular forum to keep everyone informed and let everybody know what's happening in school. As always, you can continue to email questions and concerns to Ms. Webb, and she will record those questions, and then we will answer those questions either in our next community forum or we'll do so in our School Matters article. Before we get started this evening, we would like to thank three people. Ms. Carlene Webb is here with us this evening, and she will read out the questions. We also have Mr. Tim Landefeld. He is Assistant Principal over at West High School. He helps us often as we do some of our community forums, virtual programming. Certainly do appreciate him. We also would like to thank Scott Azale. Scott is in charge of the multimedia program over at East, and both of these individuals have been great to help us as we started this journey over a year ago as we began to do some of the community forums that we had when COVID first started. So these guys have been relentless in their efforts to keep the community informed, and we appreciate those individuals. As we go through this, one of the things that we would like to point out very quickly is this is a live presentation. And with any live presentation, there's a multitude of things that can go wrong. If those things do go wrong, we do have the program recorded, so individuals can watch that at a later time if they so desire. So we certainly hope that things go well tonight, but also know that anytime that we have a live presentation, multiple things can happen. Also, one of the other things that we wanted to talk to folks about is that we have seen, for the first time since school started, we have seen a reduction in the number of cases that we have seen in the district. Last week, we had over 300 cases, active cases in the district. This week, we're at about 236, which is a reduction, and we've not seen that so far. We don't think that our numbers have stopped rising, and certainly we don't think that we're out of the woods by any means at this particular time. So we do need to keep diligent in our efforts to make sure that we control the spread of the virus as much as possible. But it also is our hope that this virus is running the same course that it has run in other parts of the country, and that some of the models have predicted that it would. And those models have predicted that the virus will burn hot for a short period of time, and then things will begin to stabilize. No case or any single case would be too many, but at least we hope that our numbers are beginning to stabilize and level off just a little bit. Also, the other thing that we have said is that we're only going to take questions that were emailed to us this evening. In this particular feature, we have limited ability to take questions from the community, but again, if you will email your questions, we will make sure that we respond to those questions in a later date. And that'll be through another community forum, or it will be through our School Matters article. So as we go through this, what we will do is we will ask Ms. Webb to read each one of the questions, and then I will respond to those questions. So Ms. Webb, if you will, please, the first question.
The district stated that students had the option of attending school on Friday, or they could stay home. Why was this day considered an optional day and not mandatory for students to stay home?
Thank you. One of the main reasons that we wanted to take this Friday off was because we could extend that through the Labor Day. Then that would give us a little bit of time to rest and recover both Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday. That would give us time to get some staff members back who had tested positive. It would also give us some time to have students to come back who had tested positive and were in quarantine. The other thing that we actually thought with that, it would give us some time to let the number of cases begin to settle, and hopefully when we come back we would not have so many students that had been infected and that were in quarantine. The other thing that we decided to do with this is that we always try to keep school open if we can. Now there will be some times where we simply don't have enough staff members, or there's simply too many students that have been out, so that having school is not really a feasible option. But also we know that any time that we close school, it creates a number of problems for all of our working parents, and we want to make sure that we do our part to keep open. Because if we're not open, there will be times where nurses, law enforcement, a lot of other first responders, some critical workers would not be able to go to work because we're not in school. So we always try to stay open, and that's why we gave this as an optional day. Ms. Webb.
I have heard that some of the coaches are telling players they should remain quiet if they were in contact with someone who tested positive. Is this true?
You know, we've actually heard this on a number of cases, that situation involved coaches are telling their students not to report to school or not to report to school officials if they've tested positive, not to report that if they have been in close contact with someone. And it has been our directive from the very first day of school that we have told our coaches, we've told our athletic directors to make sure that any child that has been close to somebody or anybody that has tested positive or anybody that is showing symptoms, that we make sure that those individuals are quarantined from the team immediately so that they do not spread the virus. I think that our coaches also understand that there could be some potential short-term gains about having a student not to report anything, but then the long-term impacts of that could be devastating. So I think our coaches know, and it's certainly our expectation, that any time that a child is presenting any kind of symptoms, or if they have any known contact, or if they do test positive, that we isolate those students immediately so they do not infect the rest of the team. Ms. Webb.
I understand that elementary teachers are allowing students to use community supplies within the classroom. Is it possible for each individual child to use their own supplies to cut down on infection rates?
This is another common piece that we have heard, is that there are certain community supplies within an elementary classroom, and we would have pencils, glue sticks, scissors, a wide variety of things that students use on a daily basis. In many cases, we have tried to isolate and keep those particular supplies in the hands of only one child. In other situations, it is very difficult for us to have those isolated supplies just specific for one child. So we do try to clean those supplies as much as possible, if it's a pair of scissors or if it's markers or something of that nature. But this will be something that we will send out to our elementary principals and ask them to make extra efforts to either isolate those supplies to each individual child, or that we do attempt to sanitize those classroom supplies as much as possible. We appreciate that suggestion. Ms. Webb.
Could we have a vaccination clinic at school? I know there are several places that kids can get vaccinated, but offering vaccines at school may encourage some kids to take the vaccine.
We actually did talk about this at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, especially when students became eligible for the vaccine. We did talk to the health department about that, and there are some very strict guidelines that the health department must follow for COVID vaccines. Now, there's other vaccines that we can give at school, but COVID has become a very difficult and challenging political issue, and there's some real obstacles in place for us to be able to do that with the health department. Now, certainly our health department has been wonderful to work with, and Ms. Montgomery has been just absolutely great in responding to any questions that we have, but it's a little bit difficult to do that right now. There's some other agencies that would probably be willing to do that, but as we've moved forward with some of that, there's just a lot of challenges associated with having vaccines at school. We would certainly have to have parental permission forms filled out, and sometimes it is difficult for us to always know if that permission form came from home or if it was a student-generated permission form. And parents, so a lot of our parents have some very strong opinions about vaccines, and so we would find it just a little challenging to try to do the vaccines at school, even though we are strongly encouraging parents to do that, because we do think that the vaccines, it might not necessarily keep you from getting infected, because there have been some breakthrough infections, But at the same point in time, it does seem that the number of hospitalizations will be greatly reduced if you can get vaccinated. So at this point, we really don't have any plans to move forward with those mass vaccinations in school. Ms. Webb.
The policy on who needs to be quarantined is not very clear. What are the guidelines for who should be quarantined?
We have probably spent more time on the issue of who needs to be quarantined. And actually this summer we received legal advice from our council that said that we as a school system probably are not medically able to make those kind of decisions. And if we did try to make those decisions on who would be quarantined, it could carry some liability associated with that. So we were advised to get out of the business of quarantining and let public health make those kind of decisions. So now, of course, we assist public health with all that we can. When we hear that a student has tested positive, of course, we do contact the health department and give them those particular names. And then those are trained individuals and they can provide better information on who should be quarantined and for who and for how long. The issue with quarantining is not that there is one simple answer. It can vary greatly depending on your unique situation, the members of the household that's involved in this, if you're vaccinated or not. And so that is a difficult question to answer, but we will give you some basic guidelines. If no one in the house is vaccinated and someone tests positive, then all members of that household should be quarantined for the appropriate amount of time. The health department or the school nurse will provide you some guidance on how many days that should be. That could run from 10 days if you test positive, all the way up to 20 days if you never test positive with that, because you would be involved in a household contact with that. If you are fully vaccinated and you have a sibling, or if your mom or dad, or if you are a teacher and you end up having students that are, or children within the home that do test positive, as long as you are vaccinated and you are symptom free, then you can return to school. But it is very important that you have to be fully vaccinated, be 2 weeks past that vaccination, and then as long as you're symptom free, you can come in. Now, as we stated before, we are no longer doing contact tracing, and we've turned that over to the health department. Sometimes it is a little difficult for them to get in touch with people immediately, and it may take a little bit of time for them to contact those close contacts. We do post the numbers daily that we would have a positive case in this particular grade level at this particular school. Parents can look at that and deduce if their child was in that particular classroom, and then they can make some decisions themselves about whether or not they need to stay home. But in terms of us quarantining, the main thing is if there is a family member that is tested positive with no one being vaccinated, and then also any child that is presenting symptoms, you should stay home. Ms. Webb.
Many schools are still incentivizing perfect attendance and giving extra points for attendance. I am concerned this may encourage some students to attend school when they are sick. Can we stop the attendance incentives for now?
This is something that we talked about as a leadership team today as we saw this particular question, and we think this is probably a good idea. We are going to talk to our principals in the principal meeting about this, because I think some students do focus on that perfect attendance. I know that we are giving out extra points for students who do not miss any days at all, and while we would certainly want those students to be in class, we don't want anyone to make a bad decision that they are presenting symptoms or they don't feel good, but they still want that incentive. So this is something that we are going to check into with principals and see if there's any unintended consequences, and we will work on that particular piece this week. We appreciate that suggestion. Ms. Webb.
If a child is placed in quarantine because of a close contact at school, will those absences be excused? If a child is kept home because they are presenting symptoms, would those absences be excused?
If a child has been placed in quarantine, then those absences will be excused. This has never changed from our policy, and a student will be excused if they've been placed in quarantine. Now, I think one of the questions, though, that was a sub-question of this is that if my child was presenting symptoms but had not been tested yet, if that child were to stay out on that particular day, they wake up, they have a fever, or if they've got a headache or they've got sinus issues, and they're a little bit concerned that it could be COVID, while they stay out, would those days be counted? Now, we do give parents 5 days with a doctor's note that they can come in, or that 5 parent notes. And with one of those situations, we would be understanding on that piece if you talk to your administration. Now, it is important that you keep in contact with your administration if you're keeping a child out because they're presenting symptoms, but they've not yet tested positive. I think the problem that we run into is that we cannot have a child out for 30 days because they present symptoms and then think that everything's going to be okay, because that would not be a situation that would be good for that child or good for the school. But at the same time, we would ask parents who would have those kind of questions and those kind of concerns to contact your school and let them know, because we can help you through some of those situations, because again, this could be a question that might vary according to the particular child. If you missed no days whatsoever and you were only absent 2 or 3 days because of some symptoms being presented, then that would not be a problem at all. We can work with parents with that. If a student has already been exhibiting poor attendance and they've missed multiple days, then that would create some problems. So again, make sure that you contact the school and make sure that you are in communication with them. Now, what we do ask, however, is that if your child has a fever, if they are throwing up, if they were to have diarrhea, if they were to have any of those major symptoms or major health issues, then do not send them to school. Because if they do present those symptoms at school, we will contact you immediately and have you come back and pick that child up. So again, if they are presenting symptoms, keep them home and then contact the school. And as long as your child is legitimately sick or presenting symptoms, we can take care of the absences. Ms. Webb.
We have an
Immunocompromised?
You got it. Adult living in our home. Our younger children cannot receive the vaccine. How can we continue with in-class school classes and ensure any guarantee of safety?
You know, we've had this question too posed by multiple parents. We can never guarantee the safety of any child. I don't think any parent can guarantee the safety of any child. Simply living in today's society, there's always the potential of exposure. And so we're taking certain steps to limit that particular exposure, but we certainly could not guarantee the safety, nor have we ever pledged or said that we would. However, we do take some precautions to help that. And the one thing that we have talked to parents about, that if you do have that medically compromised child, or if there's somebody medically compromised adult living in the home, then the thing that we do have the option of is that we do have the option of homebound instruction. There's some paperwork that have to be filled out with that, and there's also some specific guidelines that you must follow. But if you do have that condition, if you would contact us, then we can walk you through the steps of taking the necessary precautions to make sure that you can increase the chances of safety within your home. There's also some virtual school options, of course, outside of the district right now, and there would also be the option of homeschooling for a certain period of time if absolutely necessary. But it is our hope that we can provide that kind of instruction that is necessary to get us through this particular spike. Again, it is our hope that these numbers will begin to level off and plateau soon, and that we will begin to see a reduction and hopefully return back to normal. But for this point in time, we will have to do all that we can, and if you do have those conditions at home, call us and we will try to work something out for you. Ms. Webb.
How can the schools ensure we do not have a breakout since the health department is conducting contact tracing?
You know, we have done some things within the school to prevent the breakouts, and one of the things that we do, of course, is to sanitize more regularly. We do try to separate students, and in some of our schools right now, we have had staggered lunches where some of the kids would go to lunch while others would eat in the room. We also try to social distance when we possibly can. And we have also encouraged people to wear masks for the next 3 weeks. We know that many individuals within our community are very resistant to the wearing of masks, and the board has stated that they will not have a mask mandate. The governor's executive order has also made it practically impossible to have a mask mandate because there would be a parent opt-out. But we have simply asked parents, for the next 3 weeks, let's try to wear masks and maybe help stop the spread of this virus. So we are doing a few things to help stop the spread of the virus, but when the state took away the option of virtual education, that really created some issues for us in terms of social distancing, because we had 20 to 25% of our students take the virtual option, and then when they did so, then that meant that there was a quarter less students within our classroom, and that did enable us to spread out just a little bit. With the absence of virtual education, it does create a few more issues for us, but we are taking certain steps to keep students as safe as we can and still keep school open. Ms. Webb.
How can the public know if a child or teacher within a classroom has tested positive? Are there legal concerns for the school district by not letting parents know specifically who has tested positive?
That's always been another challenge for us, is that many parents would call us and ask who actually in that particular classroom tested positive. And of course, we cannot give out that information, nor would we give out that information. There are certain HIPAA laws that would prevent us from of giving out confidential information, nor would we want any child to be labeled with that particular issue. And so we do maintain confidentiality, but what we do each evening is that we do update the district website, and we would say that we did have a confirmed case in 3rd grade at Fairview Elementary School, or whatever school it would be in. And then parents from there could make the decision if they needed to watch their children more closely. Now, I think in many cases the children may know who that particular child was, but it does not come from us. And then parents could be a little bit more conscientious as they begin to watch their children. However, another thing that we have said to everyone all along is that I'm not sure that any of us have not been potentially exposed. As we begin to circulate through the community, and as we go to church, as we go to Walmart, as we go to the bank, as we go to the post office, a variety of things, with our numbers the way they are, I think we need to be super conscientious about our own medical condition, and any time that we begin to present symptoms, that we exclude ourselves and get tested just as soon as we can. Ms. Webb.
Would I be held liable if I sent my child to school and my child infected other students or the teacher? Would I be held liable for any medical expenses?
We are certainly not a legal opinion group, and we are not lawyers or attorneys, but I don't think that there's any way that any parent could identify a particular student as being patient zero. So I don't think that there is a way that parents or teachers or other children could argue that you were the individual that infected their child. I think there is widespread contagion right now, and so I don't think there's any way that a a parent would be held liable for another student becoming infected. Now, what we would do, however, is we would expect and we would hope that parents would be conscientious, and if their child was presenting symptoms, that they would not purposely and intentionally let a child come to school and then infect other individuals. I think if it was an intentional piece or a purposeful piece, then I think there could always be some concerns about that. But in the normal day-to-day operations, I don't think that there's any legal concerns there. Ms. Webb.
Who do I share the results with if my child tests positive with a self-administered test? Should I contact the health department or the school?
We get that question too very often, is that with the advent of the self-administered test, which there are many of those now, individuals are not real sure who they should contact. Our recommendation is to contact the school nurse, and we will record that information, and then anything that we receive, we will make sure that the health department gets that information. Certainly you're welcome to contact the health department directly, and there would be nothing that would prevent you from doing so. However, if you contact us, then we do keep a record of that, and then we're able to deal with attendance and some of those issues a little bit more effectively. So our advice would be, if you take a self-administered test, you become positive, then we ask you to contact the school nurse. Ms. Webb.
Without a mask mandate, with a no vaccination mandate, and no virtual school option, what other options are available for parents to keep their children safe?
Again, that is a situation where we realize that this school year we're not as well informed, or we're not as well equipped to keep students as safe this year as we did last year. We know that there's a great deal of opposition to mask mandates within this county and within this state. We know that there is a great deal of opposition to vaccinations and whether or not those are effective or not, but certainly those things would help us in terms of controlling the spread of the virus, we think, within the school. We also think that with the virtual option being taken away from us, as we did last year, that creates another handicapping condition for us. However, we do continue to sanitize the classrooms as much as possible. We are dividing some of the lunchrooms up in some of our schools when it is appropriate to try to move students out of those classrooms or that lunchroom situation. We are still disinfecting the buses on a daily basis, and we are trying to maintain as much social distancing as we can. We're also encouraging parents, like I said before, for these next 3 weeks to please consider wearing a mask just so that we can get through this spike. So it is more challenging this week. We have acknowledged that from the very beginning. But we do hope, again, that our numbers are beginning to stabilize and that we can return back to something like normal soon. Ms. Webb.
What are the protocols for a child who is presenting symptoms but the parents do not want the child to be tested?
You know, we do have that situation every now and then that, especially with some of our younger children, that they begin to present some of those classic symptoms, but parents don't want to have that child tested. The thing that we ask is that if a child is presenting those symptoms, to simply stay at home. If you continue to present symptoms over multiple days, I would think that parents would want to consider testing, because that creates an issue for the entire family and then any contacts that were to come into that family. But right now the main thing is, if you are presenting symptoms, do not come to school, because we will contact you to come back and pick up your child. But at some point in time, you may need that positive test documentation to help us with attendance and some of those issues. Ms. Webb.
What is required for an absence to be excused when a child has tested positive or is presenting symptoms?
Again, this is another common question that we get, and almost everything that you do with testing will have some type of documentation with it. The health department will provide you with that documentation. Your doctor or physician would present you with documentation. Also, if you do the self-administered test, almost every single one of those will present some kind of documentation. And it may simply be that you take a picture of that on your phone and keep that particular documentation, but the main thing is try to have some type of documentation that indicated that you were positive. Again, being in close contact with the school would help eliminate many of those particular concerns. Ms. Webb.
Will CDC recommendations be kept as recommendations, or will they become mandates?
At this point in time, the local school board has authority to run schools, and they are not regulated by CDC. Certainly, we look at those recommendations. We do adhere to many of those recommendations, but those recommendations will be maintained as recommendations, and we will, in conjunction with our public health department and with our school nurses here, we will make those decisions which we feel are best for Hamlin County. Ms. Webb.
Will the school nurse contact a parent for permission before any action is taken on a child?
Yes. We want to make it real clear that we've had several questions from parents thinking that we were actually administering some of the COVID tests at schools, that we even had some parents believe that we were vaccinating students at schools, and we do not do any of that. Nothing that we do is really invasive at school. We may take temperatures on a particular child, but from that point, we really do not do anything else unless we check with parents. We do not administer medication unless the parents have given us permission to do so, and that's in a health plan. But our nurses will always check with parents, and in most of these situations, all that we do is try to comfort the child until the parent can come and get them, because we don't have the authority, nor do we feel like we should be primarily responsible for medical care. We just do some of the basic triage kind of pieces, that if a child did have a bloody nose, or if they had a cut, or if they had something of that nature, we would go ahead and try to do the first aid piece, but then we would contact parents immediately to take over from that point. Ms. Webb.
What would put a child in quarantine from school besides being sick themselves, and for how long?
Again, a very complicated question, but we'll try to answer that. A child could be quarantined if they live in a home and one of those family members become positive. So that has never changed from the very beginning. So if you were in a home and there were 3 siblings and a mother and a father, if anybody in that house tests positive, then everybody would be quarantined unless you are vaccinated. So assuming that everybody was unvaccinated, then everybody in that home would be quarantined. Now, the length of that quarantine could vary, because if you don't test positive, you could be quarantined up for 20 days. However, when you do test positive, then it's from the day that you begin to present symptoms, and that could be a 10-day period of time. So the main thing to do there is contact us if you have questions, and we can help you through that particular process. Now, the other situation that has changed to some degree is that if members of that household are fully vaccinated, so you have received both shots or the 1 shot of the Johnson & Johnson, but if you are fully vaccinated 2 weeks past that point, and if you are symptom-free, you do not have to be quarantined at that point. So if the 2 brothers were to test positive and the sister did not test positive and she was fully vaccinated, then she can return to school if she is symptom-free. Now, what we do ask everybody in that situation, of course, is the infection time could vary greatly among individuals, and so we would ask those individuals, if they come to school in that kind of condition, that they do be a little bit more respectful and ensure that they do act as if they have been infected so that they can protect other individuals from that particular infection. But in that situation, with this particular question, you would be quarantined if you were in a household that someone tested positive. You would also be what we would consider to be a self-quarantine, that it wouldn't be necessarily mandatory, but if you begin to present symptoms, we would send you back home. And so it's better that you just simply self-quarantine yourself until those symptoms become free, or you've tested and you realize that you have tested negative. Ms. Webb.
It is still unclear about what changes have occurred with contact tracing and quarantining students. Can you walk us through the process for a 3rd grader, a 7th grader, and a 10th grader to cover all 3 levels?
We can, and I think this is something that has been very confusing because this has changed. The CDC regulations have changed. We've changed some things as we've gone through the process. So we no longer do the contact tracing except for a minimum amount at the elementary level. So we'll walk you through each of those levels and see if we can kind of add some clarity to it. So at the elementary level, when a child has tested positive, then we will go back in and look to see who was close to that particular child. As we begin to identify those children, then we will contact the parents and let them know that this particular child that their particular child was sitting close to an individual who had tested positive. We ask the parents to monitor for symptoms, and we encourage them that they may need to stay home for the next several days so that we can see if they turn or if they begin to present any symptoms. Normally in elementary, what we do is we ask parents to keep those children home for 5 days. Now, however, if the child is not presenting symptoms, then they are welcome to come back to school. And that's a situation that we struggled with last year just a little bit, but of all the students that we sent home last year, very few of them actually ended up testing positive. Now this year, we had more students test positive that we quarantined to begin with, but when we did the close contact tracing a week ago, and we were very diligent in those efforts, we actually had less students test positive this week than we did the other week. Now, it simply may be that the virus is just taking its course in our community, and we may have had smaller numbers anyway. But with the quarantining, we just found out that we were not very accurate with who that particular child may have been exposed to. So at the elementary level, we do contact tracing. We would contact parents of any child sitting close to that child, and we would recommend a 5-day quarantine for that child. But if that parent decides that they want to send the child to school and there is no symptoms, the child may come back. At the middle school and high school level, there is no difference with that. We do not do the contact tracing. We simply send that information to the health department. The health department will contact you if they feel like you were a close contact, and they would require you to be quarantined if they felt like it was necessary. So at the high school and middle school level, we really do not have a school-imposed quarantine at the middle school and high school level. Ms. Webb.
Are staff members following the same guidance as the superintendent referenced about students not be forced to quarantine if they are fully vaccinated?
There's nothing that changes with that. As we stated before, if a staff member is fully vaccinated and they live in a home where there is a household member, they can still come to work. Now, what we have asked our teachers to do is that if they are in a home or if they've been exposed to someone, then we ask them to be extremely conscientious as they come to school and work. So we ask them to maintain more distance. We ask them to wear a mask. We ask them to be more conscientious about everything that they do. Now, of course, if those staff members begin to present symptoms, then we ask those individuals to go home immediately. But yes, same rules apply to our staff members as it does students. Ms. Webb.
Are staff members required to wear a mask if they have had a known exposure? I understand the school district may not be allowed to force students to wear a mask, but can the district force staff to wear a mask? Would it help to encourage students to wear a mask?
I think that the school district legally could probably require staff members to wear a mask, but we've chose not to go that particular route. We think that we have asked our teachers to wear a mask, especially during the next 3 weeks. We have asked our central office folks that when they go out into the school to make sure that they are wearing a mask, again, to set that example as this particular parent posed. And we do hope that our staff members are doing everything that they can to make students safer in their classroom. Now, I do think there are times where if a teacher is up in front of the room and they're lecturing and there's that distance between them and the students, that it may be appropriate to take the mask down, and so that they can better articulate the message to students. But if they are close to students, working with them right over their shoulder, then it may be more appropriate at that time to wear a mask. But the board has made no indication that they're going to require masks from staff, but we are strongly encouraging that. Ms. Webb.
Can we take some of the other steps to help stop the spread of the virus? For example, can we have temperature checks, increase spacing in classrooms, spread students out in the classrooms, increase emphasis on cleaning and hand washing? Can we use the COVID relief funds to help with any of this?
We can, and actually we are doing some of those things. We certainly have encouraged our custodians and staff to do thorough cleanings of the school as often as we can. We've also talked to our students about the need for those personal hygiene practices, about washing your hands and not putting anything into your mouth where you've had unwashed hands. We have also used some of the disinfectants to disinfect the buses. We have those large sprayers that can cover large surfaces and disinfect those. So we're certainly taking some of those steps. We have found out with the temperature taking that last year we virtually found no student that had tested positive who had an elevated temperature. And so we just really felt that the time and the staff that we used to do that, if it had such a low effectiveness rate, we would be better off dedicating those resources to other areas. So the temperature taking was not one that we felt was effective. The other situation is that we do try to spread students out as much as possible. The problem that we run into with that is that with all students being in school, we simply don't have enough space to spread those students out. Most of our classrooms are 700 to 800 square feet. A lot of our classrooms are running from 18 students up to 30. And so when we have those kind of conditions, it is very difficult to spread those particular students out. We were able to have a little bit more success with that last year when we had virtual education, because we had 20 to 25% of our students out. But we do, we have incorporated some things into the instructional day to spread students out, but that is an area that we struggle with to a certain degree, and we're very open about that. So, Ms. Webb?
TDOE announced they would consider allowing individual classrooms or schools to pivot to remote learning if necessary. Will we use this option to help slow the spread of the virus?
Yes, we will do that. The Tennessee Department of Education actually recently released some information that said that we could use remote virtual instruction in certain situations for specific classrooms or specific grade levels. And so with that, we've actually already used that in some cases. We had a middle school that we had to shut down a particular grade level, and we did use some virtual education with that. And so as we go through this process, when we get to a point that we feel like the numbers have become excessive, then it would be a situation where we would utilize virtual education to help stop the spread of the virus in a particular grade level, a particular class, or within a school. Ms. Webb.
How does the school district receive funding? I have heard that the district does not get as much funding if a child attends virtually. Is this accurate?
You know, we have had that numerous times of that. Some folks think that we have stopped doing virtual education because it impacts our funding, and that's not the case. We receive funding based on the number of students that we have enrolled. And so as long as the student is enrolled in school, we get funding for that individual. It doesn't matter if that individual is on homebound. It doesn't matter if that individual is virtual or if that student is in class. We receive funding based on a student being enrolled in Hamlin County. And so our decision to move away from virtual education had nothing to do with funding. It was actually a decision that initially we felt like the virtual education was not reaching every particular student. And then also when the state made the decision that they were going to place major restrictions on virtual education, then that's when we decided to move away. But it had nothing to do with funding. Ms. Webb.
Some surrounding districts have shut down specific schools or the entire district. Do we have any plans to shut down the district or schools? And what are the consequences if we shut down schools?
The state actually did provide us with the option that we could use some of our bank time for virus-related closures. And so we can now close schools if we feel like the numbers become excessive. The consequences associated with that is that we only have a certain number of days built into the calendar. So if we use those days early, or if we don't use them wisely, and then we do have inclement weather days as we get into the winter, then it will be a situation where we would have to make up those days. Now beforehand, we didn't really have the authority, or the superintendent didn't have the authority to close down school for anything other than inclement weather. We actually had to get permission from the Commissioner of Education to do so, but that has changed now. So we can use those days, but we still have to make up and have to document 180 days. So we will use those days if we need to, and if it's necessary, we will close the school or we'll close the entire district. Okay? Ms. Webb.
That was the last question.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I certainly do appreciate you joining us this evening. And I know that this is a difficult time for everybody in our entire community. And I think that almost everyone that I have talked to, they have become extremely tired through this whole process. It is a frustrating kind of piece for individuals. I know anytime that you have family members that are sick and hospitalized, that's got to be trying on you. I know that we've had several of our colleagues and several of our friends experience some major health issues associated with the virus. So it is an extremely, extremely difficult time. What we do hope is that everybody will do everything that they can to prevent the spread of this virus. We know that vaccinations are a personal choice, and we know that some individuals do not have any faith in the vaccinations, but I think some of the data probably would prove that it helps to stop the spread of the virus. Again, this is a personal decision. We would never mandate a vaccine, nor do I think we have the authority to do so. But it may help in terms of the number of folks that are actually hospitalized. I think the numbers are holding pretty accurate with that. Locally, statewide, and federally, I think, or nationally, I think that anywhere between 80 and 90% of the people that's in the hospital right now are unvaccinated. So we do ask people to think about that. We also ask the individuals to think about wearing a mask for the next several weeks, because there is no way that we will be able to control the virus if our entire community doesn't control the virus. We would have 10,000 students coming into this building every day, and if you actually think that each one of those students would have 2 parents and you end up doubling that, we would have a significant portion of this community coming through our school doors every single day. And all it takes is 1 student, because we have found out now that the R0 value associated with this particular virus is over 8. And what that would mean is that each infected individual is expected to infect 8 other people. So we need to be conscientious about that, not only within the school system, but also within the community. So we ask everybody to do everything that they can so that we can keep our schools open. And as we go through this process, I know for us, it's a battle every single day about maintaining a balance. We want to keep schools open, because if we don't keep schools open, students can't come to school. If students cannot come to school, a lot of those individuals don't have any breakfast, they don't have any lunch, they lose instructional time of which they desperately need, because they were already behind at the beginning of the year because of the disruptions that we experienced last year. So we want to keep schools open, but we also understand that we have to do so in a safe manner. So we ask for your patience, we ask for your prayers in terms of helping us make the right decisions as we move forward in this process. It is our hope that the numbers will begin to stabilize, that our numbers will plateau out, and that we can return back to some sense of normalcy soon. In the meantime, we've got to maintain a vigilance in this and make sure that we do everything that we can, not only to protect ourselves, but to protect our family, our friends, and everyone in our community. We wish you the very best, and we ask everyone to stay safe, and we appreciate all that you're doing in our community. Thank you very much.